All right, buckle up. We're back in action here. I'm betting you on the Odd Shopper YouTube channel. Ben Rasa, Matt Gajewski, and the entire group of five, all the random schools out there that don't deserve their own episode. No offense. I love all these schools dearly, but there's a lot of schools. We want to give these conferences some breakdowns because there's some value out there. We're going to talk about those schools. We're going to talk about some of our favorite plays, picks, teams from those schools, maybe a dark horse, and a couple of schools that we're not as high on. I want to welcome you in, though. All things betting here, college football centric on Betting You. If you like this type of content, like, subscribe. Sir, I know you've been in the weeds in the CUSA Sunbelt world. What do we make? I've been asking you this in the big conferences. Is there any chance for multiple bids from these type of leagues?
Almost zero. You'd need more than one undefeated team.
Yes.
Is what you would really need. And you're allocated one highest rated conference champion, which makes it tricky this year. I'm sure we'll talk about Liberty when we get to Conference USA, but man, that conference is a disaster outside of Liberty. So they got a pretty decent shot to go undefeated. If they do, does that hurt a team like Boise, who might have one loss? Probably is one loss. They play Oregon. What do they do? So there's a lot to be determined with the G5 this year. That doesn't mean it's not an awesome conference. Top to bottom, this is some of the best viewing in the country.
Oh, yeah.
You now have MACtion, and to complement that, Coos is playing a ton of weekday games. So people are more familiar with these conferences sometimes than some of, like, especially the Pac-12 and stuff formerly. I mean, like, last year I watched a ton of Florida International, Sam Houston games because they're playing on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, and on Saturday, like, I'm certainly not prioritizing Cal or something. So I knew a lot of these players, and I think that's kind of why they're near and dear to our heart. They play at weird times, guys transferring down or guys coming up from like D2. The football's really greasy. You got a lot of weird offenses. All the service academies are in this. And it's not just that. You have a ton of option offenses, air raids. Everything across the board is represented in these conferences, which is why we love them.
That's why we love them. Yeah, I was just looking at Sam Houston's schedule. They play on Tuesday or Wednesday, basically like every week.
See, that NFL doesn't.
Yeah,
you're going to know everybody on here. You're going to know everyone on that roster.
Yeah, I knew it last year when they miraculously lost like 8 games in a row that they should have won. Another story for another time. Let's start diving into these conferences. We are going to start not in Conference USA. That would be fake news. We are going to start in the AAC when I can find it. Here we go. Yes, the New York schools are not listed. Thank you. Teams like Memphis, Tulane. Obviously, it's a conference. In recent years, it's undergone some change, like all of them. What is the lay of the land here? To me, there's a lot of moving parts. But the AAC, how strong are they amongst these conferences, and who's the biggest threat?
I used to think this was the cream of the crop in the G5, but they've lost so many good schools.
Yes, since
UCF, Houston, they just lost SMU. I won't name them all, but basically everyone from the top of this conference, they get the first look from these P4 conferences that continue to lose teams to the Big Ten and the SEC. So that continues to happen. And they're backfilling with a lot of teams formerly from Conference USA primarily. You know, they add Army this year, so you got an independent there. But you have 5 former Conference USA teams that are now in the AAC, just overall a lot weaker. So I don't think this conference is the favorite to get one in the G5, but there are a couple teams up top that certainly have their chance to get there.
When you look at the top of this, Memphis is the favorite according to the books. Do you agree with that, or is there another school that maybe you think deserves some shine here to kick it off?
I think Memphis is the rightful favorite, largely because of what they bring back on offense. You have a returning signal caller in Seth Hennigan, awesome player. The starting running back from South Carolina, Mario Anderson, transfers in. You're also very deep there. Sutton Smith and Brandon Thomas have played quite a bit. So even though you lose your starter, I see this as kind of a wash compared to last year's roster. Most of your main pass catchers are back. Rock Taylor, Kobe Drake, Demir Blankham-C, both tight ends. You have 2 starters back on the offensive line, but you backfilled that with 5 transfers, so it should be pretty good. New DC, which I think is an upgrade. I don't even think I can count the amount of transfers on this defense. There's so many, a lot of them starters from previous programs, a lot of down transfers from Power Fives. So it's an awesome Memphis roster. And to complement this, some of the other teams in this conference are down. Tulane is going through a complete coaching change, and I like Sumrall coming in, but it's year one, and a lot of those players were poached by Houston, where their former coach went. So Tulane's kind of in flux a little bit. UTSA's lost a ton. Their seven-year quarterback, Frank Harris, is gone. The big three receivers they had, now only one remains. I think that team is going to be a power run game. But there's questions with the other teams that are generally at the top of this conference, which also leads me towards, the chalk pick of Memphis. You never love making the chalk pick, but I do think they win this conference, and I think there's an outside chance they're the representative for the college football playoff, because they're going to be tested. So, if they come out with one loss in this schedule, they could be the team that's chosen. You do play Troy. They're at Florida State. You don't need them to win that game, but, like a good showing would be nice for the playoff committee. And then you do play some good teams in this conference. You have to go at UTSA, at Tulane. Those are tough, but they're better than either of those teams. So 2 good wins. Memphis could be represented. I think this is the best team.
I do too. I do want to ask you about, I know you kind of have a couple teams at the bottom that maybe you're higher on just to overachieve, but one team I want to ask you about real quick is South Florida. This is a team that I'm pretty high on. You're talking about 6.5 to 1 right now to win the conference. They return a ton of production. They've got an infusion of transfers, particularly at wide receiver. I think they're dangerous. I don't like their schedule. They do have to go on the road to FAU and some of these other teams. South Florida, any love for them in your models?
I have them power rated 4th in this conference,
Okay.
slightly behind UTSA. And I think this is a good team. You basically need to fix the offensive line and your defensive backfield. Those were the biggest weaknesses South Florida had last year. And you mentioned it. They basically return they have 12 players that had over 300 snaps on defense, 13 on offense. So they're fully back. But what did you do to fix those 2 weaknesses? You only brought in one offensive lineman. He was a Colorado player, and, Dion ran off all those guys. Individually, you only had one player above average, but this was a young group. So I think you could have some optimism. They're at least better than, like 100th, which is around where they were last year, 92nd in pass blocking, 128th in run blocking. Plus your QB is awesome. Byron Brown had a really good season, and they retained him somehow. He does a lot mitigating that pressure with his legs. They have great receivers, and their defense was already pretty good. In the back end, that's where they added 4 of their transfers. So I do think you see some improvement, especially in that unit. You have a Youngstown State, a James Madison, a Tennessee, and a South Carolina transfer. 2 of those guys are just top 600 recruits, so they should be better. I like them. You just get a really hard non-con. Go to Alabama, Miami, at Tulane. You do you play Memphis at home, So it's a tough schedule for them. I don't know on a win total, but I'm probably going to bet them situationally. I like what they return.
Yeah, I'm a fan of the team in general as well. Before we move to the next conference, though, there are teams like East Carolina, North Texas, Tulsa's awful. Temple is like 500 to 1. Anyone here that you think could overachieve, even if maybe realistically they don't win the conference?
So we're going to do a question like this for every conference, I believe. This was the hardest one for me to choose because I like North Texas. Their schedule's awesome. I want to fade FAU. They've got a cupcake schedule. So I'll briefly touch on North Texas. I'm going to bet this team a lot week to week. I'm going to bet them week 1. I'm going to dabble with the money line in that game. They're 7-point underdogs. I have them power rated almost the same. But anyway, this team is an awesome quarterback. You go from Chandler Rogers, that's tough. He goes to Cal, but you bring in Chandler Morris from TCU, 4-star, dual threat. Really good player there. You lose all your running backs, but Ikiaka Ragsdale started in 2022, and he had good grades as far as any sort of efficiency. You bring in Zach Evans from Minnesota, Juwan Price from Syracuse, Dalton Carnes from Houston, DT Sheffield. At receiver, those are pretty good units. You have 5 transfers on your offensive line. That was basically the biggest concern with the unit last year. And then on defense, you have a ton of awesome transfers, especially in your secondary, which was your biggest concern. 2 guys from Texas, a 3-year starter from Ole Miss. This is quietly a really good roster. It's just they play a brutal schedule. So my dark horse is going to be this North Texas team. East Carolina would be another I mentioned, but I think I want to bet North Texas a couple more times in the regular season.
Yeah, I'm with you. I totally get that. I think that middle pack of South Florida, ECU, North Texas can make some noise. I'm not super high on Florida Atlantic. You mentioned Cupcake schedule. Still kind of on the outside looking in, not doing anything with them, but that's kind of how I have it rated as well.
Yeah, I agree.
Final question before we move to the Mountain West. How bad is Temple? Like historically bad or just bad?
That's another reason why I think we'll talk a fade in each conference. Like Temple is with Kent State, worst team in the country. You put them up against Kennesaw State, the newcomer. I don't know that Temple's favored. So it's like you have this clear bottom end of the conference. So the fade question is tricky. The answer I want to give is Army because they replace so much. But how fading a triple option team is hard. They knock off someone they shouldn't every single year. They give everyone a game because they're so different. So, I mean, like, Army has 2 starters back in the offensive line and 3 on defense. This team could be horrifically bad. So I want to fade them, but I will defer and say Rice instead, who goes from JT Daniels to EJ Warner. Warner had an awful go of it last year at Temple. Might not be his fault. The Rice defense was atrocious. They have a lot of players back there, but they didn't do anything to fix it in the transfer portal. 2 starters in the offensive line. They want to be a power run game. Dean Connors is back, but yeah, I don't know what to make of that. They're the other team I would say is fade worthy.
Yeah, Army always gets it together. They are a team. Fade at your own peril, people, because it's really hard to prep for them. They get Rice early in the year, and I have a feeling they can knock Rice off. It'll
really
be
hard conference to pick. I think
Yeah.
there's a lot of balance here outside of Temple.
Poor Temple. Moving to the Mountain West, a conference that's represented itself pretty well. Now it's hard to find. Here we go. And you see, Boise State's got a minus right in front of them. It's minus 110, but still, I think that shows that they're not messing around here. They are the favorite. And then there's a couple. You see Air Force kind of take a step back, and then a big group. So we're gonna dive into it first, but I think we have to start with how clear of a favorite. If I said to you, who's more likely to win their conference, Liberty or Boise? Is it Liberty to you, or do you think Boise deserves to be in that conversation?
It's Liberty.
Okay, I agree.
Liberty's schedule is unbelievable.
How good is Boise?
Boise is an awesome team. There are some questions, but this offense should absolutely hum. It's crazy they won the conference championship with an interim head coach. A ton went wrong last year, and they were so talented. Like, some of their players departed mid-season for the transfer portal. Their best receiver did that. So they're coming from, I think, a solid foundation considering everything that happened last year. You bring in a 5-star at quarterback, Malachi Nelson. Second season was with USC, just didn't win the job over Miller Moss, is what it is. Genty is one of the best running backs in the country. You get Latrell Capels back from a season-ending injury at receiver. You add in Cam Camper, who had an awesome go of it at Indiana before his ACL. 4 starters in the offensive line. 13 players on defense that have starting experience. The problem is they were 108th in defense last year. Now, is that a product of, like Avalos? You had a bunch of change. I don't know. You bring in Eric Shenander from formerly of Nebraska. This is a guy that had horrible defenses there, so I don't have a ton of confidence this is better. But at the end of the day, all they need is an average defense. You're a shootout team. You're going to win most of those games if that's how you play. Your offense is that good. So I'm just hoping that Shenander can get this unit to average instead of being 108th, and they should win this conference. It's going to be tricky, though. And a lot of it comes down to that at Oregon game in non-conference. If they get slaughtered, do they take an undefeated Liberty who's played closer games, or do they go with, if Boise wins the conference championship, do they take a 1-loss Boise who's been slaughtered by Oregon? I don't know the answer to that. That's their toughest test.
Oh, no doubt. No doubt. If they get tripped up, and it's a big if, in the Mountain West, do you think it's more likely Fresno or UNLV? Those seem to be the 2 biggest threats.
Those are the 2 biggest threats for sure. Some change with both those teams. Fresno lost Tedford. Sadly, health concerns. Hope the guy's okay. But when they lost him previously, they did not miss a beat much. Fresno, I think, is a solid team. I guess my concerns with them really come down to the defense. Kind of like Boise. They have significant concerns on the interior and on the back end. That's an issue for me. UNLV, it's basically just like, what do they do at quarterback? They brought in 3 FCS transfers. It seems like they're down to 2 of them now in a battle between Haj Malik Williams and Matthew Sluka. Both of them are really good dual threats, but they're coming up to the Mountain West. It's not going to be easy. I would rather bet on the upside of UNLV if one of those guys hits, but I think it's still a bit of a risk for both of them.
In terms of a dark horse, like I said, I'm going to ask you this for every conference. Lower half, San Diego State, Utah State, San Jose State, Hawaii, Nevada, New Mexico. My God, New Mexico. Those odds. Are any of these teams, for a win total or just to take a step forward this year on your radar?
The 2 teams I think take a step forward. One is Wyoming. Awesome offensive line, return a ton of production there. They just lost their running back, Harrison Whaley, which is why I'm not quite as optimistic. But they have DJ Jones, a transfer from North Carolina. So I think they'll be okay there. Their quarterback is enormous, and their defense is very good. Awesome secondary and awesome edge presence. There aren't a lot of teams that are comprised like that. As far as like a win total, someone that could really outperform, I do think it's Hawaii. Braden Shager had an awesome season, and everyone's back. They just reinstated Stephen McBride from his arrest. There's no word on if he's going to miss games or not just yet, but he's back practicing with the team, which is a positive. You add him to Bufele Ashlock. You get back Jonah Pinock, who missed all season. Offense is 3 starters back on the O-line. That was an excellent unit. Hawaii was already hanging with a lot of teams last year, should have beat Vanderbilt, and that wasn't the only one. This team's going to score with you, and if you can't keep up, that's going to be a major issue. Their schedule is also not that difficult, so I'm somewhat interested in an over win total with Hawaii. 2 dark horses are going to be the Rainbow Warriors and the Cowboys of Wyoming.
Hawaii has 2 FCS schools on the schedule, and Sam Houston, and New Mexico, and Nevada. Multiple games at home, too. That should be 5 right there. I really don't. I think they're a 7-5, 8-4 team. I think they take a step forward as well.
Delaware State won 1 game in the FCS last year, and in week 1 against UCLA, Hawaii's already been pounded. It's below 2 touchdowns now.
Yeah. And then they get Sam Houston, Northern Iowa, San Diego State, Boise at home, which is tough. Go to Pullman, Nevada, Fresno, UNLV, Utah State, and New Mexico. It's very manageable. They got some L's in there, of course, but they can navigate that.
Yeah, it's a better Hawaii team. They're going to be fun at midnight when you're coming home from the bars.
It's very true. In terms of a short, obviously it's not a conference that I think is really set up for, unless you thought that Boise was going to take a major slide back, and I really don't. Maybe it's a team, I'll just leave it to you. To me, San Diego State and San Jose State in recent years have overachieved, and now they're not expected to. Who do you see maybe not contending that has some decent hype?
Yeah, both those teams going through coaching changes as well. I do think they are worthwhile to short, but the team I'm looking at is Air Force. This team has so much change, more than Army. 2 starters back on offense. They're both pass catchers. That's not good.
That doesn't count.
5 starters back on defense, only 1 in the front 7. This unit is atrocious, and they don't recruit, they don't have transfers, so you're dealing with a whole lot of unknown. And the difference between like Army, Navy, and Air Force is Air Force's win total is still at 6.5. I see a maximum of 6 wins. Probably Merrimack, Navy, Army. That's those 3 teams all play the same offense. I mean, you could lose to either one of those service academies. San Diego State, who's a toss-up, and then Nevada, New Mexico, who are atrocious. I mean, this might be a 3-win team if they lose to the other service academies. I think Navy's the best of those this year. I don't know. And this is plus money to the under. This is one I'm going to definitely take.
Ooh, interesting. Now, I hate to throw a wrench into it. I already told you this. Did you see those uniforms, though?
I did. I know when you said that, I hesitant for sure.
Ooh. Yeah.
They do play a FCS team in week 1. And then they play San Jose State. You do have a runway here.
They definitely have a runway, but you mentioned one of the things that's a little tricky with the academies. When they all play, all hell breaks loose. You see this every year. Like the best academy doesn't always win the Commander's Trophy. It's very difficult to navigate that. And if they get tripped up by Army or Navy, I think they have almost no path to 7. And I'm a big Air Force guy. I absolutely was pounding them the last couple years. This is not that team. Hard to really argue with that, but it's going to be a fascinating conference. No doubt about it. We're going to move on to the MAC in just a second, but of course, I want to mention you're here at Odd Shopper. Hopefully, you're enjoying this content. College football is getting started. Bets are being dropped, and that means there are opportunities for you to jump on these lines, be part of the community, and you can do that right here. You go to Odd Shopper, you hop in the marketplace, and you're going to see you want college football, you got me and Matt right here. We're available. Our Discords are linked up. Come on in. This is great value. Is absolutely worth it. It's a fun community. And find what you're looking for. I can't advocate it enough, whether you want to hop in and get all my egregious soccer plays and all that. But obviously, we've got college football, and there's no one that does it better than the man that I'm talking to right now. So it's all available. The links are below, and we'll see you in there for what's going to be an absolutely phenomenal season because UMass is in the MAC. Now we get to talk about the MACtion. I assume they're playing on the weekdays as well, correct?
I think so. I think they're still technically independent this year, but they have like an entire MAC conference.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, they're not even listed, these absolute clowns. Okay, Kent
They
State.
used to be in the MAC.
And then they literally were like, we can't be associated with you. Kent State looks to be extreme. You mentioned them already, but man, they're 250 to 1 to win this. That's quite unfortunate for them. Let's start with the real teams, though. You've got a 2-horse race here, which I think is pretty cool. Miami of Ohio and Toledo. I'll just get it out there. If I had to pick one, I'm Team Miami of Ohio. I like what they return a little more. I kind of trust them. They've got some stability. I think they are the best team in this conference, but set the stage. I'd say the MAC is the least likely, maybe second least likely to get the auto bid. I see almost no way that happens.
Yeah, probably the least likely because you have like one wagon in Conference USA. And I don't know. We'll talk about some of the other ones later. I think this is 5 out of 5 to get the auto bid.
They're not getting it. It's just not happening.
Toledo versus Miami, Ohio. Toledo has a new QB and an entirely new offensive line. Not one returning starter's back. Their skill position players are all back. But then you lose your best defender in Quinyon Mitchell, who erased one side of the field. So, yeah, you have 7 guys back with experience, but your departure in Quinyon Mitchell is as bad as it gets. Plus, like, Dallas Gant was your second best starter on defense. RJ Delancey transfers to Wisconsin, third best. Terrence Taylor off the edge, fourth, all gone. Miami, Ohio does return more. All of it hinges on Gabbert staying healthy for the most part, which has never happened, but, I'll take that bet most of the time. I think Bowling Green is a dark horse to win this conference. Not exactly like dark horse how we've been talking about them earlier, but I think if you want to make a bet to win the conference, they should be right there. The favorites never win this conference somehow, which is wild. Yes. But Basilic has like 4 years of starting experience. He's back. Your best pass catcher, Harold Fannon's back. Your entire O-line. Your defense, which is solid and was pretty injured last year. Your entire defensive line is back. Hardeman only played a couple games because of injury. Everyone in your secondary except one player. And then you went out and you added 5 transfers. So my favorite to win this conference from just a futures perspective is actually Bowling Green.
I mean, they beat Georgia Tech last year. I saw it firsthand. Very disturbing. And I get it. You mentioned this is a wide open conference. In recent years, you and me have had futures on the Kent States of the world and stuff, and they've made it through.
Before last year.
Yeah. That's very good. Very good. From the bottom half, Central Michigan, Eastern Michigan, Ball State, Akron, Kent State, UMass isn't even on the screen. Not saying any of these to win it, but a team that maybe is poised to knock off one of these teams, be a tough out. Who's kind of your sleeper team in the conference?
It's Central Michigan. I think this team is interesting if you want to take a longer shot to win the conference, just because we see this happen in the MAC. Like a team that's projected in the bottom half very well could win this. We just don't know. There's so much change year over year. They have a dynamic quarterback in Bert Emanuel. He's so good with his legs. And I think he's kind of unknown as a passer. He had an injury to his throwing shoulder last year, so he's kind of noodle arming it out there. And he missed a ton of the season. All your skill position players are back. This team is a power run game. 3 on the offensive line. They had 1 transfer. Defense is pretty good. I think it's a little weak up front. But I have this team power rated slightly ahead of some other teams in this conference. So I have them ahead of Northern Illinois, almost right there with Western Michigan. So I think they're slightly underrated in the futures market. Overs are juice, but I think they make sense. And if you want to go pretty long shot, this is about as far as I'd go to win the conference.
In terms of some of the bad teams who are maybe even in worse shape, I'm going to throw this out there. Ball State is a team who returns like literally nothing. They are going to get absolutely smoked against Miami, and then they hop right into their schedule. I don't like this team whatsoever. It would be a win total-esque type play. Are they on your radar? Is anyone else on your radar in terms of a team that might really struggle?
Yeah, this team is 2 returning starters on defense. They took last year's starting quarterback, Kyle Kelly, and moved him to defensive back. There's some things on this roster that I just flat out don't know what's going on. You're starting a redshirt freshman at quarterback in Simonza. We've never seen him. The defense has 2 returning starters, not including the starting quarterback who's now playing defensive back. I don't know if he's going to start. They weren't great to begin with. Their defense was 116th. So I guess if you this is the MAC, maybe Kyle Kelly's just like the best athlete you have and you want to put him on defense. This is like high school stuff. They were outside the top 95 in every defensive category. And I can tell you this, the guys they brought in are not better than what they had last year. So I don't know, that team's a disaster. What's that?
5 wins. They need to get 5 wins for you to lose this. How are they getting 5?
Missouri State.
1.
Kent State.
2. Buffalo.
Maybe Buffalo, who's the other team I kind of want to briefly mention.
Those games are both on. I mean, again, it's bad, but like if you're going to lose, you're more likely to lose at Kent State and at Buffalo, which they are.
I think you can take this under and Buffalo's because even in this rubber match, I still don't think the under for either team is going to come down to this game. They need to win more than there's a 5.5 out there for Buffalo. So Buffalo could lose, or I guess Buffalo could win this game and still come way in under this win total. The same thing goes for Ball State. So I like both. Buffalo's a disaster. They have no skill position players back from last year. CJ Ogbonna might be their quarterback. The guy can't throw the ball. 3 back from an offensive line that was not good. 88th in pass blocking, 126th in run blocking. Your defense was 50th, but you lose a lot of your best players. You're basically hoping that Sean Dolak stays healthy and leads the defense to success because you lost your 2 best starters in Max Michel at the edge and Joe Andreessen at linebacker. Your 3rd best starter, Damon Williams, and your 4th, Devin Gant, are also gone. You don't backfill them with anything that's particularly noteworthy. Most of the max transfers are like FCS D2 guys coming up. Sometimes you get a decent Power 5 that comes down, but that's mostly the other conferences. I like shorting both these teams, and I honestly don't think the rubber match between them is that significant.
No, I don't either. Because again, you mentioned this. Like, give that to Ball State. Okay, they have 3. Now they got to find 2 more. Where are those coming from? You give it to Buffalo, they've got to find 5 more.
Buffalo's schedule is even worse. They play Lafayette, FCS, but top 20 FCS team. Not ideal. Your other non-con games are against Missouri, UMass, and UConn. I think they probably lose all 3 of those games. And then if Lafayette gives them a game,
there are no wins on these schedules. Like, yeah, you could beat Akron, but you're on the road.
Akron's not bad. They're not good. I have Akron power rated ahead of both Ball State and Buffalo. I think Akron wins both those games.
You have Kent State behind both of them, right?
The bottom of the conference, I have Kent State worst, Ball State second worst, then Buffalo, then Akron, then Eastern Michigan. Then there's a gap to Ohio, who I have also pretty far down there.
Okay, that's fair. Man, Kent State. We don't need to talk about them, but
quickly on Kent State. They're so bad. I bet Pittsburgh -24 against them, and I hate Pittsburgh.
So Kent State plays St. Francis, the one from Pennsylvania, because there are 2 of them. I don't know if they win any other games, though.
Their win total is what, 2.5?
Their win total is 2.5 juice to the over. I honestly don't think they get there.
So the only thing with Kent State, quickly, they return almost everybody. It was a year 1 rebuild with a new coaching staff. They started to get better at the end of the year. They still don't have a quarterback. They have a horrendous offensive line. They return everybody, but they were 124th in pass blocking, 131st in run blocking. They do lose most of their secondary, which I don't know if that's good or bad. They were 123rd. I think they're better, but did they bridge the gap between I don't know, the other teams at the bottom. So against like Pittsburgh, I'll bet Pittsburgh just with this talent Kent State has. But between Buffalo, Ball State, and Kent State, they might have bridged the gap more than we think, which is why I can't bet an under because those teams are horrendous. So is Kent State. Who is the most horrendous? I don't know.
Very fair. They were 1-11 last year. They didn't beat any FBS schools. It's not something I'm betting. When you get Pittsburgh, Tennessee, and Penn State, you have obviously no runway. You're going to be 1-3, and then you get into the
You might also have lost like 6 starters by then.
yeah. When the entire team is critically injured, that's also not a recipe for success. But it's tough seeing in. I don't know where the hell's Kent State. It's in Ohio, right?
Yes, I don't know what city it's in.
Maybe I think there's a Kent. It doesn't matter. None of this matters. What does matter is now we're getting serious. We're going to the Sun Belt. The Fun Belt, probably the coolest conference out there. Some moving parts, there's no doubt about it, but some teams that I honestly think are worth the price of admission. App State is here. Texas State, the darlings from last year for us. You got Lafayette, James Madison, South Alabama, Troy. Talk to me about this conference because I have some strong takes here.
App State, I think, has a path to the college football playoff because of, a head-to-head against Liberty. That's going to decide a lot. If App State wins that game, Liberty's dead. And then App State, they'd obviously need to win the Sun Belt and probably play well against Clemson. But I think that's the best chance for a Sun Belt team to come out of here because of their head-to-heads in non-conference. I don't think App State's the best team in this conference, but if they can get it done against all the other teams on the schedule, beat Liberty, I think they have the best path because of other teams. My favorite team is Texas State. This team led the country in fumbles last year. My goodness, I'm not kidding. They were an unbelievable offense, fumble-wise, just baffling stuff. And generally, turnovers regress. I say generally because there is some coaching involved in this. I hope they've just been doing fumbling drills the entire offseason. All they did was change DCs. Not a big change there. This offense brought in Jordan McLeod from James Madison. They brought in 4 transfer running backs, and they didn't lose Ismail Mahdi. Was awesome, and he's still there. They brought in both UTEP backs, Hankins and Burgess. Sick players there. Hobart's back, their best receiver from last year. They bring in Bo Sparks, Jaden Williams, Jalen Griffin, 2 tight ends. You already had 4 starters back on the offensive line. They complement that with 4 other transfers. This is the best offense in the conference. I don't think it's particularly close. Some of their problems were on defense last year, which they were still 49th. They gave up a ton of points, but I think that was more the product of, all right, we fumbled at our own 20. Sick. Now the other team has to go 20 yards for an automatic score. So this defense, I think, is quietly underrated compared to where a lot of people have them just based on points per game. But they bring in pretty good transfers. Tunmi's Adeli from Michigan State. Lange from Houston comes in. You bring in 2 linebackers, which should probably start right away. Alex Mara, probably the best player on Eastern Michigan's defense, should play right away. Your defensive backs, you have transfers from Cincinnati, UTEP, Arkansas State, Texas A&M Commerce. The FCS will ignore, but there's a lot of pretty decent starters to complement a secondary, which is all the way back. They didn't lose anybody of consequence. I mean, this is good. I think they could beat teams like Arizona State. Arizona State's way down. That's a good P4 win, And I don't think this schedule is particularly hard. They should beat UTSA, Sam Houston. Then you go to Troy. They're way down. Arkansas State is a team I do like, but Texas State is a better roster. There's like the bottom of the conference, and then you got your shots at the top. I think this is the best team in the Sun Belt.
Here we go. Hot takes. Texas State could go undefeated. Texas State, if they beat Arizona State, I think could be favored in all the other games.
I have them power rated ahead of everyone else. I know that there's a lot of disagreement in this conference, a ton of it. This is probably the most, we should maybe spend the most time on this conference.
Yeah, I agree. Listen, I'm a big Texas State guy. I absolutely loved them last year. They brought in the architect of the incarnate word coaching staff. I love that guy because what he did with Cam Ward, all of that. And he immediately, I bet them in week 0 or 1 against Baylor. Obviously, I didn't think they were going to win like they did. But this team knows what they're doing. You mentioned McLeod, absolute stud. They had Finley and Hornsby. I don't see any drop off from them. 8.5 at plus money, I absolutely love. And I think they have a real shot to win the conference, and B, a real shot to beat Arizona State in non-con. I'm very high on this team. I think they take another step forward.
They don't play App State either.
No, they don't. That's what I mean. Their schedule is super manageable. Toughest games: Arizona State at home, Arkansas State at home, maybe UTSA at home.
I love Arkansas State. I think Arkansas State is sneaky harder than a lot of people think.
So do I. What's Texas State's toughest road game? South Alabama?
Yeah, probably.
And it's the last game of the year.
I have Troy power rated as the second worst team in this conference.
Troy's a disgrace. I already talked about them. No offense to Troy. They lost the entire team. I'm not high on Troy at all. But talk to me about Arkansas State. I do want to mention them because they found, it's always fascinating to me. They found something with the quarterback that I certainly didn't know about, and then they retained him. Where are they now? Because it seems like they're ahead of schedule.
I have this as the third best team in the conference, albeit extremely close with Louisiana and just behind Appalachian State. Kind of a backdrop for this team. They are the best recruiting team in the Sun Belt. It's not even close. Top 3 recruiting classes in this conference over the last 3 years. The other teams at the top, like App State, finished 7th this year. Texas State finished 8th. You've been stacking these classes for 3 years now. There is more depth on Arkansas State than any other team in this conference. And I think your higher in talent is a little better too than some of these teams, especially like at the quarterback position. This is the product directly of their recruiting. They get Jalen Raynor. He starts immediately. Well, not immediately. They lost some games because they were stupid.
Yeah, they lost by 80 to Oklahoma, literally 80.
Yeah, well, I don't know. Maybe Raynor wasn't ready because he was a freshman, but it's kind of crazy to me. The second he comes in, he's awesome. This kid, and they have depth. They bring in Timmy McClain. He's better than a lot of starters in this conference, and he's your backup. Raynor can run and pass. He's awesome receivers. On top of being a good recruiting team, they're also a hotbed for Power 5 transfers coming down. Corey Rucker is there. Courtney Jackson came from Syracuse. Their running backs from Purdue. They brought in Goldie Lawrence, a 4-star. He comes in this year. You also have like guys you can gamble on. Malik Hornsby, the dynamic athlete's going to try and play receiver. We'll see if it works, but I mean, I'll throw a dart on him. You have your entire starting offensive line back, 5 starters. You bring in 1 transfer there for depth. I think that's fine. Your defense, 3 returners in the secondary, 3 returners in your front 7, backfilled by a ton of transfers. And I think these are some quality guys. On the defensive line, you bring in Micah Overton from Texas A&M, Chris Pearson's from Houston at linebacker. Marvin Ham has actually played a significant amount for Colorado at linebacker. So yeah, Colorado sucked on defense, but he's going down a level of competition. You afforded a little bit of, I guess, fluidity there. Adrian Cole was a solid starter at FIU, and Mahoney for UMass. These aren't drastic differences in competition. This team, I just don't think is being rated as highly as they should be, considering they have depth, they have good transfers, and they already showed a lot last year. They can button up this defense a little bit. They're a serious threat.
Yeah, I mean, just for context, I talked about how much I like Texas State. Arkansas State last year hung 77 points on Texas State late in the year. 77. I mean, it's an impressive team. There's no doubt. Yeah. I mean, it's just now they're gonna take some L's in non-con, which don't matter for this stuff. But Michigan, honestly, they should lose to Iowa State. Iowa State's a good team, but it's no gimme. Arkansas State's a very good team, and I get it. And there's a lot of wins on this schedule as well. So definitely with you there. I do want to talk about because you've mentioned Temple and you mentioned Kent State, but Louisiana Monroe would like a word. 400-1 to win the Sun Belt. Are they in the conversation for the worst team in the country?
I think they're a little better than Kent State and Temple, but
how many wins?
What's their win total? 2.5 or something?
I believe it's 2.5. It's almost impossible to get the 1.5s out there. Only UMass at times is capable of that. This is pretty bad though. This is 2.5 severely juiced to the under.
Yeah, who's the winnable games on their schedule?
Well, they get one,
Jackson
Jackson
State.
State, and then there's no more wins. So they're going to finish with one. They'll be underdogs in 11 games.
I can't see their roster right now. My Wi-Fi is battling. So
That's not even. I think that's just a product like they don't want to show you. There's nothing to say.
Yeah, you might see me cut out here again. My
Well,
Wi-Fi
I'll
is
take it
battling
from here with Louisiana Monroe. Jackson State is the first game, and then it's just you got UAB, Texas, Troy. Honestly, that could be a win. James Madison, Southern Miss, South Alabama, Marshall, Texas State, Auburn, Arkansas State, and Louisiana. What?
I don't see a lot of wins there.
Yeah.
But I also don't know how much worse they are than Troy, Old Dominion, and some of the other teams on this. I have a hard time with James Madison too, man. Like losing Signetti. A lot of people like this FCS coach they bring in, but man, you lost your whole defense. I don't really see it with them either. Won't belabor Troy. We hit them on the win total show, but their roster is like a JUCO team.
It's bad.
The other team that's really bad, I think, is Old Dominion. They lost their whole defense, basically.
Poor Louisiana Monroe, they don't get Old Dominion, which is a huge miss by them. Not that it's their fault, but that would be a very winnable game. They just don't play them.
Yeah, I just got this to load. Man, I don't know how UL Monroe wins games. They have one returner they have one returning starter on offense. It's their left guard.
Nice. Build around him.
Elijah
Who's their
Fisher,
quarterback?
man.
I genuinely don't know. Who's their quarterback?
Hunter Herring, I think. They have General Booty there.
Okay.
So he might win the job, but their most experienced player is Hunter Herring.
Yeah, I mean, not to waste too much time here. If you're looking for a hilarious sweat, I don't see. Maybe they can get to 2, but there's just there are no paths. They're just awful.
I agree with you. Yeah, to sum up this conference, I love Texas State. I don't know if they're worth like futures, but I'm going to bet them a lot. My dark horse is Arkansas State. I kind of like Georgia Southern too as an underdog. I like what they do. They run a fun offense that's hard to put together. They're going to start an unknown quarterback. I think David Dallas is the favorite. He has good weapons, and they have a whole offensive line back, 10 starters on the defense back. They're a sneaky team too for a dark horse. My fades for sure outside of UL Monroe are James Madison and Troy.
Yeah, I'm very big on the Troy fade. I don't like that team at all. Not because, again, it's just they have a complete overhaul. They won double-digit games in a couple years. It's not going to be that simple. And I kind of feel the same way about JMU. They really turned it on. They made such a great transition into the FBS. I think they do take a step back. All right, we got one conference here, and then again, so I always say, if you're in Discord, we're of course going to be talking about. If you're in Matt's Discord, he's already dropping plays. He'd be happy to answer any questions about all this knowledge, get those depth charts and that usage data and whatnot. I'm being there in my channels as well, talking through things, having some fun. Let's talk about Conference USA. This is a fascinating conference in the sense of the Liberty situation that you've already alluded to. They are minus 200 to win the conference, and it's hard to argue with that.
Yeah, I have no pushback. This is the best roster by far. From a power ratings perspective, you have like 7 of the bottom 10 teams in the entire country. They're the conference that always, aside from James Madison recently, they're the conference bringing up these new teams that jump from the FCS. This year's Kennesaw. For Liberty, it comes down to like they're unbettable because of the betting markets. Liberty's not sneaking up on anybody, but that game against App State looms large. It might be the biggest G5 game of the entire year because of what's at stake. Liberty needs to be undefeated to have a shot at the playoff, and even if they are, they might get left out still. So they need to have a good showing against App State. It's kind of just like, who do we think can maybe challenge them in conference? I don't know. Do you have a candidate?
I think that if they get knocked off in conference, it would be, and again, I'm stretching here, the last game of the year they go to Sam Houston. I think Sam Houston's going to be okay. That's a long time. A lot of things could happen, but I just don't see. Obviously, the App State game's the App State game. You got FIU, who I think is going to be better, but they're on the road. Kennesaw, that would be a big ask. Jacksonville State, I'm high on, but they're on the road. UMass is on the schedule. Western Kentucky, I know they're the most serious threat, but I don't really see it. And then Sam Houston. First of all, I wanted to ask you about Sam Houston specifically. You know who's on that roster is Grant Gunnell. Remember him?
Oh yeah.
Is
You know
he
who's actually not been bad? I did a deep dive on Grant Gunnell. He's a 66% completion, 7.3 yards per attempt, 15 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. He doesn't run much, but he doesn't take sacks either. He's kind of just neutral there. 11 big time throws, 12 turnover worthy plays. There's quarterbacks worse than Grant Gunnell.
Why is he not? Is he not going to win that job?
Well, they added Jace Bauer from Central Michigan, who's a better athlete for sure. I don't know about pure passer, but the quarterback room is not awful at the end of the day. Like these are two decent quarterbacks for this conference, and there are some horrendous quarterbacks in Conference USA. So, I mean, you're starting from a good place, and outside of quarterback, every starter's back on offense. Every offensive lineman, even Ify Adeyi, a wide receiver's back healthy, and man, Noah Smith stepped up in his stead. You bring in Jay Ducker at running back too, so you've like a solid player there. I think their transfers on defense are going to fill a lot of the gaps. I don't hate this team, like Denver Warren from New Mexico State, Dylan Frazier, SMU, Marcus Moore, North Texas, Quincy Wright, Oregon State. For a lot of teams where you see transfers in Conference USA, it's like FCS, D2. You have a lot of good transfers for this team. I think Sam Houston was actually listed as one of my dark horse candidates for this conference. I like him quite a bit here.
Yeah, I do think, again, last year I watched them give games away and they were getting acclimated. I think they're going to look a lot better. I don't know if they can truly challenge, but when you look at the discrepancy, you've got Liberty at minus 200. You've got Western Kentucky at plus 450, Jacksonville State at plus 550. Sam Houston's 18-1. Like, that's a huge gap, and I have them closer to Jacksonville State and Western Kentucky than I do Louisiana Tech and Middle Tennessee State.
Oh, yeah, me too.
Yeah, so it's like, okay. I mean, the bottom half of this conference, you got those two clowns. Then you got UTEP. New Mexico State is just here. I do think FIU is going to be better. If they're 100-1, they're not going to win the conference, but are they the clear worst team? Well, actually, let me ask you this too. Is Kennesaw going to be like absolutely horrendous, or do you think they'll just be standard bad?
I think because Kennesaw runs like the triple option or a version of it, they're going to give teams games that they shouldn't. They're going to be like Army, Navy, and Air Force, where they're hard to prepare for. So, especially in this conference, man, with some of the talent, I wouldn't be surprised if Kennesaw won like 4 games. This line is moving. I am going to bet Kennesaw week 1 against the UTSA. I can almost guarantee it. I'm looking for some numbers between 24 and 27 so we can get almost 4 scores, 4 touchdowns of leeway. They're going to play slow as hell. They're going to be, I don't know, maybe 30% pass. They were 32% last year, and that was high. They were much lower the year before. They redshirted a bunch of guys. So I don't think Kennesaw is terrible. They're bottom 10 team in the country, but the way they play is going to keep them in games they shouldn't be in. So, I mean, like, give me 24.5 against UTSA in a game that's going to be slow as hell, run heavy as hell. I don't know. I'm interested in Kennesaw. I'm with you on FIU, too. I don't think they're horrific. They got their quarterback returning. He was at least showed flashes. He was a freshman, so he's got to cut down on some of the turnovers, but that's very possible for him. I don't know. Who did I write down as? Oh, I wrote down Middle Tennessee as the team I like worst. I don't know
much. What do they have going on?
Nothing good.
Okay.
So, I guess to go to the Rasa, I mean, if you like FIU and Kennesaw even a little bit, you got to pick someone who those teams are going to beat. They have a completely new coaching staff. Derek Mason comes in. So, I mean, at least he's been a head coach before. He's a very strong defensive guy. Your OC is Brody Reeder from Northern Iowa. Pretty balanced team, so not much to see there. Vadiato's back at quarterback, which is probably your strength. You lost basically all your good receivers, so I don't have a lot of faith there. Elijah Metcalf, England Chisholm, Justin Olsen are all gone. So Holden Willis is probably your best guy that returns. 1 starter on the offensive line. You only brought in 2 transfers, so that unit's going to be ravaged. And then you have 3 starters on defense. You only brought in 4 transfers. So yeah, like Derek Mason comes in, he has a lot of experience, but he's standing on Middle Tennessee's depth. Middle Tennessee, this team has been 6th in recruiting in this conference the last 3 years. If you look at where they finished last year on defense, they were 104th. Their best unit was their pass rush. They were 77th. They don't have any of their edges back. They're all gone. 97th in coverage, 93rd in run defense. You have nobody back from your defensive line. You have one returner from your front 7. Your coverage unit was the worst one on the team, so having 2 starters back there doesn't really do anything for me. This team is horrendous. I wouldn't be surprised if they just lost straight up to some of these teams that are also near the bottom. I'm definitely willing to short them.
Yeah, I'm not really there. I didn't have much actionable info on that team, but by product of liking Sam Houston, by product of liking Jacksonville State, liking FIU, the whole concept is that they're going to beat some of these other teams like Middle Tennessee State. And those are where the upsets come from. All right, we went through all the conferences. Before we bounce on out of here, and again, as I mentioned, if you have any questions, Matt_Gajewski on Twitter, JazzRazBets on Twitter. And you know what's next? Week 0, betting you. It's coming out next week. We're going to be diving into the, what is it? Couple games, but we'll do what we can.
4 games.
4 games.
Unless we're going to do the FCS v. FCS games.
No, we can't. That's too crazy. But we will do the FCS versus FBS because I'm going to be getting wild with those.
Well, did you see one of them?
No, I haven't even looked. Who is it?
Okay, well, sneak peek. New Mexico's a 9-point dog to Montana State. And then, if it couldn't get
really
worse.
True?
What's that?
Is that really true?
Yeah.
See, that's over the top.
And Hawaii's a 38-point favorite over Delaware State.
Well, Delaware State, yeah, so that's the thing. We're not going to go on a tangent here, I promise, but I will say, and you talk about this all the time. Everybody, if you're watching college football stuff and you hear FCS, everyone just equates all those teams the same, and they're not. Playing Delaware State versus playing like North Dakota State might as well be, completely different. Delaware State is objectively awful even within FCS.
Delaware State won 1 game. They lost to Army 57-0, and they scored 14 points or fewer 7 times.
I might honestly bet Hawaii.
I would too if they didn't have. We're getting ahead of ourselves. They play UCLA week 2. Which
let's not get crazy. Okay, let's go back to this. Sorry, everybody. Big thoughts on the G5. Favorite teams. Just highlight a couple of them, and maybe a team or two that you're really not high on.
Yeah, teams that I'm high on. North Texas, this has got to be a week-to-week bet. Their path out of the AAC is not good. In the Mountain West, I would say Hawaii. They're at the bottom of this list for me. My favorite dark horses are in the other conferences, Arkansas State, Georgia Southern. I'm a big fan of Texas State as well. For my fades, I've got Middle Tennessee, Troy, Ball State and Buffalo, Air Force, and I'll pass on the AAC. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm with you. My big fades are going to be Troy. Really, really not a fan of what they've got going on. I don't see how Ball State achieves their win total. I think they're just absolutely in for a really rough year. AAC is tough. I like South Florida, but it's more of a week-to-week thing. And I'm with you. Arkansas State and Texas State, probably two of the teams that I am highest on, along with Sam Houston. I think that Sam Houston has the roster to compete in Coosa, not maybe to take down Liberty, but I think they get to that final game with a chance. And that's all you really can ask for. Can't wait to get the season started. These previews have been awesome, but there's nothing better than the real thing. And it is coming up next week with week 0. So on that note, we're going to bounce on out of here. But for me and Matt and the entire Odd Chopper team, buckle up. Big season ahead here at Betting You. Get inside the ropes. Go to oddchopper.com. See you next week for the start of college football.